Hey, sunshine? The man's voice stopped me so completely that my hand slipped from the car door. For a moment, I honestly thought I had imagined it. The nickname hit me like a physical blow. Not because it was unusual, because it belonged to one person. Only one, my husband. For 37 years, Thomas Parker had called me Sunshine. Not Evelyn, not Evie, not Honey, not Sweetheart. Sunshine. It started the summer we met in 1978. A waitress accidentally spilled orange juice on me during our second date. I laughed so hard I nearly fell out of my chair. Thomas looked at me and said, "You know something? You smile like sunshine." The nickname never left, and neither did he. Until cancer took him 8 years ago. Now I was standing in front of his mother's house, staring at a stranger sitting on the porch swing, hearing a voice I didn't recognize, speak a name that belonged to the dead. My heart began hammering. The man seemed to realize what he'd done. His expression changed immediately. Confusion. Regret. Concern. Ma'am. I couldn't speak. The world around me felt strangely distant. The white farmhouse. The old maple tree. The porch swing moving gently in the wind. Everything looked real, yet none of it felt real. Because nobody called me Sunshine anymore. Nobody. Thomas had been gone for 8 years. 8 long years. And suddenly I was hearing a ghost. The stranger stood. He looked to be in his late 30s. Tall, lean, dark hair, worn jeans. Nothing remarkable about him, except the look in his eyes. The second he saw my reaction, he seemed to understand he'd made a mistake. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. I still couldn't answer. My throat felt tight. My chest hurt. Not physically, emotionally. The way grief hurts when you think you've learned how to live with it, only to discover it has been waiting patiently around a corner. "Who are you?" The words finally escaped. His shoulders stiffened. "Daniel. Just Daniel. No explanation. No context. Nothing that helped." "Why did you call me that?" Silence. The man glanced toward the front door, then back at me. "I think maybe we should talk inside." The answer only made things worse, because it wasn't an answer. And after 8 years of loss, I was tired of mysteries. Very tired. The screen door opened before either of us could say anything else. My mother-in-law appeared. Margaret Collins, 89 years old. Much smaller than I remembered. Much thinner. The years had not been kind. Neither had grief. For a long moment we simply stared at each other. The last time I'd seen her was at Thomas's funeral. 8 years earlier. 8 years of silence. 8 years of anger. 8 years of avoiding each other. Then she whispered my name. Evelyn. Suddenly none of the anger mattered. She looked fragile. Human. Old. And very close to the end of her life. I walked toward her. Slowly. Carefully. Neither of us knew exactly what to do. Eventually she opened her arms, and I stepped into them. The hug felt awkward at first, then real, then painful, because too much time had passed, too much life, too much regret. When we finally separated, both of us were crying, not dramatically. The quiet crying older people do when they no longer have energy for dramatic things. "Come inside," she said. I nodded. But before entering the house, I looked back at Daniel. He was watching us from the porch. Quietly, patiently, and somehow that bothered me more than if he'd been rude, because he looked like someone who belonged there, and I had no idea why. The drive to Margaret's house had taken nearly 3 hours. 3 hours to travel a distance I'd spent 8 years avoiding. The phone call had come 4 days earlier. I still remembered every word. Evelyn. I almost didn't recognize her voice. Margaret. A long silence followed. The kind people leave when they don't know where to begin. Finally she spoke. "I'm dying." No introduction. No small talk. No attempt to soften it. Just truth. I respected that. Perhaps because old age eventually teaches people not to waste time. The doctors had found heart failure. There wasn't much time left. Weeks, perhaps. Months if she was lucky. "I need to see you." That sentence surprised me more than the diagnosis. For 8 years we'd barely acknowledged each other's existence. Now she wanted to see me. Why? I asked exactly that. Her answer stayed with me. Because some mistakes shouldn't survive the people who made them. I didn't sleep much after that phone call. Not because I was angry. Because she was right. 8 years earlier, after Thomas died, grief had turned both of us into people we didn't recognize. I blamed her. She blamed me. Harsh words were exchanged. Terrible words. Words neither of us could take back. Eventually, the relationship shattered completely. I stopped visiting. She stopped calling. And time did what time always does. It made the distance seem permanent. Until that phone call. until mortality entered the conversation. Now here I was, back in the house where Thomas grew up, the house I'd once visited every Christmas, every Thanksgiving, every birthday. Walking through the front door felt like stepping into another lifetime. The living room looked almost identical. Same fireplace, same piano, same family photographs, only older, faded. Like memories themselves. Margaret lowered herself carefully into a recliner. The effort seemed exhausting. I sat across from her. Daniel disappeared into the kitchen, giving us privacy, at least physically. His presence still lingered in my thoughts. Finally, I asked the obvious question. Who is he? Margaret looked toward the kitchen, then back at me. A complicated expression crossed her face. Not fear, not guilt. Something else. Something harder to identify. You'll understand soon. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because I had spent the last 10 minutes hearing variations of that same answer. You sound just like him. Who? Thomas. The room fell silent. Margaret smiled sadly. He always hated ruining a surprise. That single sentence nearly broke me. Because suddenly I could hear my husband laughing. See his smile. Remember his voice. Memories arrived so quickly they hurt. Margaret watched me carefully, then reached for my hand. Her fingers felt cold, fragile. Thank you for coming. I swallowed hard. You said it was important. It is. The seriousness in her voice caught my attention immediately. Whatever had brought me here was bigger than an old family disagreement. Bigger than guilt. Bigger than reconciliation. I could feel it. And for some reason my eyes drifted toward the kitchen doorway again. Toward Daniel, the stranger who knew my nickname. The stranger sitting in my husband's childhood home. The stranger who somehow carried a piece of my past. A piece that should have died 8 years ago. And deep down I knew my life was about to change. I just had no idea how. I spent my first night in Margaret's house staring at the guest room ceiling. Sleep never came. Every time I closed my eyes I heard it again. Hey, sunshine. 2 words. That was all. Yet they had managed to undo years of carefully constructed grief. For 8 years I had worked hard to build a life around Thomas's absence. Not move on. I hate that phrase. People don't move on from a marriage like ours. They move forward while carrying it. That's what I'd done. Or at least I thought I had. Then a stranger on a porch spoke a nickname. And suddenly every wall I'd built seemed fragile. Around midnight I finally got out of bed. The house was quiet. Old houses make different sounds at night. Wood settling. Pipes creaking. Floorboards whispering beneath your feet. I walked downstairs toward the kitchen. A small light glowed over the sink. And to my surprise, Daniel was sitting at the table. He looked up when I entered. Couldn't sleep? I laughed softly. Not really. Me neither. I opened the refrigerator and grabbed a bottle of water. For several moments neither of us spoke. Then I sat across from him. Directly across. Close enough to study him. Close enough to ask questions. Let's try this again. Daniel smiled faintly. I figured that was coming. Who are you? The smile disappeared. Not because he was offended. Because the question mattered. A lot. I don't know how to answer that quickly. Try. He rubbed his hands together. A nervous gesture. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of answering, he asked a question. Did Thomas ever tell you about a shelter in Dayton? I frowned. Number? An addiction recovery program. Number? The confusion in my voice was obvious. Daniel nodded slowly, as if my answer confirmed something. What does that have to do with anything? He looked down at the table. Then back up. Everything. That wasn't much of an answer. But unlike earlier, I sensed he genuinely didn't know where to begin. Finally, he leaned back. Mrs. Parker. Evelyn. He nodded. Evelyn. The way he said my name felt respectful. Careful. Almost protective. And that only made me more curious. Thomas changed my life. The statement caught me off guard. Not because it sounded impossible. Because it sounded sincere. Very sincere. How? Daniel stared at his coffee mug. For a few seconds, he seemed to disappear into a memory. When I was 27, I lost everything. His voice had changed. People sound different when they're talking about wounds. I came home from Afghanistan with injuries that weren't obvious. I listened quietly. No wife. No job. No purpose. He shrugged. Then the drinking started. The pieces began forming. Not completely, but enough. I lost my apartment. His eyes remained fixed on the table. I lost my family. A painful smile crossed his face. I eventually lost myself. The honesty surprised me. Most people tell stories that make them look better. Daniel wasn't doing that. At all. One winter I ended up sleeping in my truck. Something tightened in my chest. Because I knew men like him. Every town has them. People struggling quietly while everyone else looks away. I spent nearly 2 years drifting. He paused. Then I met Thomas. The name hung between us. Heavy. Important. Where? A church basement. That answer surprised me. Thomas wasn't especially religious. Kind. Generous. Compassionate. But not particularly religious. Daniel seemed to read my expression. He wasn't volunteering. What was he doing? The faintest smile appeared. He was fixing a broken furnace. I laughed despite myself. That sounded exactly like my husband. A church calls because something is broken. Thomas shows up with tools. Anyway, Daniel continued I was helping unload supplies. His smile widened slightly. I wasn't very helpful. Why? I was drunk. The honesty again. Raw. Uncomfortable. Real. What happened? Daniel looked toward the dark window. Everybody else avoided me. A pause. Thomas didn't. That sentence landed harder than I expected. Because it was true to who my husband had been. Thomas possessed a rare quality. He noticed people. Not accomplishments. Not status. People. Most folks looked at an alcoholic. Daniel's voice softened. Thomas looked at a veteran having the worst years of his life. The room became quiet. I found myself smiling. Not because the story was happy. Because I could hear my husband inside it. I could imagine exactly how the conversation happened. Did he help you? Daniel laughed. He annoyed me. That made me laugh too. Annoyed you. For months. Now the smile was genuine. He kept showing up. Coffee. Job leads. Phone numbers. Advice. Encouragement. Thomas apparently refused to quit. Eventually, I got tired of disappointing him. Daniel shook his head. I think that's when things started changing. The story unfolded slowly. Recovery. Employment. Counseling. Housing. A second chance. And through it all, Thomas remained present. Not controlling. Not rescuing. Just steady. Like a lighthouse. By the time Daniel finished speaking, nearly an hour had passed. Yet one question remained. The biggest question. How do you know so much about me? Daniel's smile faded instantly. There it was. The uncomfortable part. The mysterious part. The reason I couldn't stop thinking about him. For several moments he said nothing. Then he stood. Walked to a cabinet. Removed a small wooden box. And placed it on the table. My pulse quickened immediately. The box looked old. Worn. Frequently handled. What is this? Daniel didn't answer right away. Instead, he carefully opened the lid. Inside sat several flash drives. Neatly organized. Labeled. Dated. My heartbeat accelerated. Daniel. His eyes met mine. And for the first time since arriving at the house, I saw genuine emotion there. Not curiosity. Not nervousness. Gratitude. Deep gratitude. These belonged to Thomas. Every muscle in my body tightened. What are they? His voice dropped almost to a whisper. Recordings. I stared at him. Unable to move. Unable to process. Recordings of what? Daniel swallowed. Hard. Then answered. Of everything he wanted to say before he died. The room seemed to stop breathing. I looked down at the flash drives. Then back at Daniel. Then down again. There had to be 20 of them. Maybe more. Each labeled in Thomas's handwriting. I knew that handwriting. I'd seen it on birthday cards. Grocery lists. Anniversary notes. Love letters. The sight alone nearly brought me to tears. Why haven't I ever seen these? The question escaped before I could stop it. Daniel looked away. Toward the hallway. Toward Margaret's room. Toward something neither of us wanted to discuss yet. That's a much longer story. And for the first time since arriving at the house, I realized the biggest mystery wasn't Daniel. It wasn't the nickname. It wasn't even the recordings. The biggest mystery was why those recordings had been hidden from me for 8 years. I didn't ask to listen to the recordings that night. Part of me wanted to. Another part was terrified. There are certain kinds of grief you don't open casually. Especially not at 2 a.m. sitting across from a stranger in your dying mother-in-law's kitchen. I closed the wooden box gently. My fingers trembled. Daniel noticed but didn't comment. That small kindness made me trust him a little more. Not completely. Just enough. Did Thomas give these to you, I asked? Daniel looked toward the hallway again. Number. Then how did you get them? He hesitated. Margaret gave them to me? The answer stung. Of course it did. My mother-in-law had given my husband's final messages to a man I'd never met. Not to me. His wife. The woman who held his hand through chemotherapy. The woman who slept in a vinyl hospital chair beside him. The woman who watched him take his last breath. I pushed back from the table. Daniel immediately raised both hands. I know how that sounds. No, I said quietly. I don't think you do. He lowered his hands. I didn't know about you at first. That made me stop. What do you mean? When Thomas and I met, he talked about you constantly. Daniel gave a small sad smile. Sunshine this, sunshine that. The whole world could be falling apart, and he'd still find a way to mention you. My throat tightened. He loved you. I know he did, but saying it hurt. Because love had apparently left me messages I never received. Daniel continued carefully. When he got sick, he started recording things. At first they were for me. For you. He said sometimes people need a voice when life gets rough. That sounded like Thomas. Painfully like him. Some recordings were advice, some were stories, some were instructions for practical things. Daniel looked down. He was afraid I'd relapse after he died. A long silence settled between us. I didn't want to feel sympathy for Daniel. Not yet. My hurt was too fresh. But I did. Because grief is strange that way. It doesn't divide neatly. More than one person can suffer from the same loss. Why the nickname, I asked. Daniel's face softened. He told the orange juice story. I closed my eyes. There it was. The second date. The spilled drink. The laugh that started a lifetime. He said if I ever met you, I'd know you because you carried light even when you didn't know it. I looked away quickly. The kitchen blurred. For 8 years, I had imagined Thomas's voice fading from the world. Now I was discovering it had been sitting inside a wooden box. Close enough to touch. Far enough to hurt. The next morning, I found Margaret awake in the sunroom. She sat in a recliner under a knitted blanket. Her skin looked almost translucent in the morning light. Age and illness had reduced the powerful woman I remembered into something fragile. But her eyes were still sharp. She knew immediately. You found them. Not a question. I stood in the doorway. Yes. Daniel had left early to pick up prescriptions. For the first time since arriving, Margaret and I were alone. Really alone. The silence felt crowded with 8 years of things unsaid. Why, I asked. One word. That was all I trusted myself to say. Margaret looked toward the window. Outside, bare branches moved in a cold Ohio wind. Because I was cruel. The answer disarmed me. I had expected excuses. Grief. Confusion. Misunderstanding. Instead, she handed me the truth too quickly. It made anger harder to hold. Cruel how, she turned back to me. After Thomas died, I hated everyone who still had time. The honesty struck harder than defensiveness would have. I hated the nurses for walking out of his room alive. I hated neighbors for bringing casseroles and going home to their families. And I hated you because he loved you most. I gripped the doorframe. I was his wife. I know. Her voice broke. That was the problem. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Margaret closed her eyes. Thomas asked me to give you the recordings. The room seemed to tilt. I had suspected it. Still hearing the words felt like being struck. He asked you? Yes. When? 2 weeks before he died. My chest tightened. He trusted you with them. Margaret nodded. A tear escaped down her cheek. And I failed him. Anger rose in me then. Hotter than before. Because this was no accident. No confusion. No misplaced box. A choice. You had 8 years. I know. 8 years, Margaret. I know. You watched me bury him. You watched me leave that cemetery with nothing but his old coat and a house full of silence, and you had his voice. Her face crumpled. Yes. The word came out like punishment. For a moment I wanted to say something unforgivable. Something sharp enough to make her feel even a portion of what I felt. But looking at her frail body under that blanket, I realized something bitter. Life had already punished her. Not enough, perhaps, but deeply. Still, pain deserved truth, so I gave it. You didn't just hurt me. She looked up. You stole years from me. Her mouth trembled. Yes. No, listen to me. I walked closer. You stole the chance to hear him when the grief was fresh. You stole the chance to let his words help me survive the worst nights. You stole the goodbye he prepared. Margaret covered her face. Her shoulders shook. And I stood there angry and heartbroken, feeling no victory at all. That is the thing people misunderstand about revenge. Sometimes the person who hurt you finally understands. And it doesn't feel satisfying. It just feels late. Very late. Daniel returned 30 minutes later. He found me outside near the old barn arms, wrapped around myself against the cold. He didn't ask what happened. He already knew. There's more you should see, he said. I turned toward him. More recordings. Number. He handed me an envelope. The paper was yellowed slightly with age. My name was written across the front. In Thomas's handwriting. Sunshine. My breath caught. Daniel's voice was gentle. Margaret couldn't bring herself to give you that either. For a moment I simply stared. Then I took the envelope with both hands. It felt impossibly light and unbearably heavy. Inside I knew waited the part of my husband that had been kept from me longest. The part meant only for me. I did not open Thomas's letter right away. I carried it back into Margaret's house like it was something alive. The envelope had waited 8 years. A few more minutes would not change that. Still, my hands would not stop trembling. I sat alone in the guest room staring at my name in Thomas's handwriting. Sunshine. 1 word. 8 letters. A whole life inside it. For a long time I simply touched the envelope. There are moments when paper is not paper anymore. It becomes a doorway. And some doorways require courage. Downstairs I could hear Daniel moving quietly through the kitchen. A cabinet opened. A spoon clinked against a mug. Margaret coughed in the sunroom. The house was alive with ordinary sounds. But inside that guest room time had narrowed to the letter in my lap. Finally I opened it. The paper unfolded with a soft crackle. Thomas had written in blue ink. His handwriting looked slightly weaker than I remembered, but unmistakably his. I began reading. My sunshine. I stopped immediately. Pressed the paper to my chest. Closed my eyes. For 8 years I had wished for 1 more minute with him. 1 more sentence. 1 more careless joke at the kitchen counter. 1 more chance to hear him say my name. Now I had it. And it hurt so much I almost put the letter away. But grief does not heal by avoiding the very thing it needs. So I kept reading. Thomas wrote that if I was holding the letter it meant he had failed to stay longer. That sentence nearly broke me. He apologized for leaving. As if death had been a choice. As if cancer had been a broken promise. That was Thomas. Even while dying, he worried about disappointing someone else. He wrote about our first apartment. The one with bad plumbing and a view of the laundromat. He wrote about the winter our furnace quit and we slept in coats beneath 3 quilts laughing because we were too poor to be angry. He wrote about the day we learned we could not have children. I had never seen him cry like he cried that evening. Not for himself. For me. He wrote that I had given him a family anyway. Through books, neighbors, students, stray cats, church dinners, and every lonely person I somehow turned into company. Then the letter shifted. He mentioned Daniel. Not as a stranger. Not as a replacement. As a responsibility. He reminds me of all the people I almost became when life was harder than I wanted to admit. I reread that line twice. Thomas had been steady for so long that I sometimes forgot he had once struggled too. Before we met, before marriage softened him, before age taught him patience. He had known darkness. He had simply become good at helping others walk out of it. The final paragraph made my hands go cold. If my mother gives you the recordings, please listen when you are ready. If she does not, forgive her if you can. Grief makes frightened people do selfish things. But do not let anyone, not even my mother, bury the love I left behind for you. I lowered the letter. My breath came unevenly. There it was. Thomas had known Margaret might fail. He had known grief could twist her. And still he had asked me to forgive her. I hated that part for several minutes. Not because it was unkind. Because it was so like him. Thomas always left room for mercy. Even when I wanted justice. I folded the letter carefully and went downstairs. Margaret was asleep in the recliner. Daniel sat at the kitchen table with the wooden box of flash drives in front of him. He looked up. You read it. I nodded. Do you want to hear one? The question frightened me more than I expected. Which one? How do you choose the first time to hear a dead man speak? Daniel seemed to understand. He turned the box toward me. They're labeled. I sat down. There were more than 20. Some labels were practical. For Daniel, when you want to quit. For Daniel, first sober Christmas. For Mom, if she gets angry. That one made me wince. Then I saw mine. For Sunshine, start here. The room blurred. Daniel did not touch it. He let me decide. After a long moment, I picked up the drive. Daniel brought an old laptop from the hallway desk. He plugged it in, opened the file, then stepped back. You can listen alone. I shook my head. Stay. Maybe I needed a witness. Maybe I was afraid the voice would disappear if I faced it by myself. Daniel sat quietly across from me. I pressed play. For 2 seconds there was only static. Then Thomas cleared his throat. My body went completely still. Okay, his voice said, warm and tired. If this thing is working, then hello, Sunshine? I covered my mouth. The sound was older than the Thomas in my memory. Thinner. Marked by illness. But it was him. My Thomas. I know you're mad, he continued. You're probably sitting there with that look you get when you want to cry but refuse to give anyone the satisfaction. A sob escaped me before I could stop it. Daniel looked down to give me privacy. Thomas gave a faint laugh on the recording. I wish I could see it one more time. The words tore through me. He spoke for nearly 12 minutes. He told me he loved me. He told me where important documents were. He reminded me to stop keeping expired soup cans in the pantry. That made me laugh through tears. Then he told me about Daniel, how the young man had reminded him that saving one person is sometimes enough work for a lifetime. How he hoped I would meet him one day. How he hoped I would understand. Near the end, his voice weakened. I'm leaving you my voice because I know silence will be the hardest part. I pressed my hand against my heart. He was right. Silence had been the cruelest part. Not the empty bed. Not the unused coffee cup. Not even the holidays. Silence. The recording ended with one final sentence. Don't spend the rest of your life standing at my grave, sunshine. I'm not there. I'm wherever love still makes you brave. The file stopped. No music. No final sound. Just quiet. Daniel wiped his eyes. I did not pretend not to notice. For several minutes we sat together in the kitchen, both of us grieving the same man from different sides of his life. Then Margaret's weak voice came from the doorway. I listened to that one once. I turned. She was standing with one hand gripping the doorframe. Her face looked gray, ashamed. I couldn't bear that he loved you enough to leave you his voice, she whispered. So I kept it where I could still pretend he belonged to me. I stared at her. There was nothing left to guess. No misunderstanding left to soften the truth. Thomas had left me a gift, and Margaret had hidden it because grief made her jealous. The revenge I wanted rose inside me then. Cold, sharp, simple. I wanted to pack every recording, every letter, every piece of Thomas and walk out. Leave her with silence, the same silence she had given me. And for one terrible moment I thought I might. I almost did it. I almost walked upstairs, packed Thomas's recordings into my suitcase, and left Margaret Collins alone in the house where she had hidden my husband's voice for 8 years. The thought did not come with shouting. It came quietly. That frightened me more. Anger that screams usually passes. Anger that becomes calm can make decisions a person may regret for the rest of her life. Margaret was still standing in the kitchen doorway, one hand gripping the frame, her body thin beneath her robe. Daniel stood halfway between us, uncertain whether to speak. I looked at the wooden box on the table. Thomas's handwriting. Thomas's voice. Thomas's goodbye. Mine. For 8 years that box had been kept from me. A part of me wanted Margaret to feel what I had felt. The silence. The emptiness. The unanswered nights. I wanted to say, now you know what it feels like. Instead I said nothing. I picked up the box. Margaret's face collapsed. She understood immediately. Evelyn, she whispered. I looked at her. Don't. My voice was not loud. It did not need to be. Daniel stepped back, giving me space. Maybe he understood that this was not his moment to repair. Some wounds can only be faced by the people who made them. Margaret lowered herself slowly into a chair. The effort seemed painful. I deserve that, she said. Yes, I answered. The honesty made her flinch. Good. Not because I wanted cruelty. Because truth should hurt when it arrives 8 years late. I sat across from her, the box between my hands. Tell me everything. She closed her eyes. For several seconds, only the old kitchen clock spoke. Tick, tick, tick. Then she began. 2 weeks before Thomas died, he had asked her to come to the hospital alone. He was weak by then. Too weak to pretend. I remembered that time clearly. The hospice bed. The oxygen machine. His hands growing cold even when the room was warm. I remembered leaving once to shower after 3 days without sleep. That must have been when Margaret came. He gave me the box, she said, and the letter. Her lips trembled. He said, Mom, Evelyn will need these when I'm gone. I held the box tighter. Margaret looked at me then. He made me promise. The sentence hit harder than I expected. A promise. Not a suggestion. Not a casual request. A dying son's promise. And you broke it. She nodded. Yes. Why? Her eyes filled. Because after the funeral I lost my mind. I waited. She swallowed. You were surrounded by people. I almost laughed from the pain of it. People bringing casseroles is not the same as having a husband. I know that now. No, you knew it then. She had no answer. That was the first time I saw the full shape of her guilt. Not confusion. Not misunderstanding. Guilt. She continued anyway. At the cemetery, everyone came to you first. I stared at her. You were his wife. I was his mother. The words came out broken. Old. Ashamed. And for a while, all I could think was that I had loved him longer. That sentence was ugly. But it was real. For the first time, I understood the wound beneath her cruelty. Not excused it. Understood it. Grief had turned love into competition, and no one wins that kind of contest. Margaret covered her mouth. I told myself you had had him for 37 years. I told myself I had lost my son. I told myself you would heal and marry again, but I would never have another child. I wanted to hate her. I truly did. But the truth is, pain can make people small. Sometimes dangerously small. And the recordings, I kept them in my dresser for the first month. Her voice shook. Every day I told myself I'd call you. Every day I didn't. Then you came here. I remembered that day. 3 weeks after the funeral. I had come to bring Thomas's childhood Bible back to her. I was exhausted. Empty. Barely functioning. Margaret had accused me of rushing through his belongings. I had accused her of making his death harder. She told me I never understood him the way she did. I told her Thomas had chosen me, not her. That was the sentence that ended everything. 8 years of silence began with 8 words spoken from grief. Thomas had chosen me, not her. I had regretted that sentence for years, but regret had never brought me back. Margaret wiped her eyes. After that, I couldn't give you the box. Giving it to you would have meant admitting he trusted me with something meant for you. And Daniel, I found him at the memorial service. Daniel stood quietly by the window. His face tightened. He was standing alone, Margaret said. I knew Thomas had cared about him. Later, when I couldn't listen anymore, I asked him to keep the recordings safe. I turned toward Daniel. You knew they were for me. His eyes lowered. Not at first. And later, pain crossed his face. Later, yes. That answer hurt. Not as much as Margaret's betrayal. But enough. You could have found me. I wanted to. Then why didn't you? He glanced at Margaret. Then back at me. Because she told me Thomas's death had broken something between you. She said giving them to you would only reopen wounds. I looked at Margaret. You used my grief as an excuse to protect your guilt. She broke then. Completely. No pride left. No defense. Just an old woman sobbing at a kitchen table. I know. There was no satisfaction in hearing it. That was the cruel surprise. For years I had imagined that if Margaret ever admitted she was wrong, I would feel lighter. Instead, I felt tired. So tired. Because her confession did not return the missing years. It did not give me Thomas's voice on the first anniversary. Or the first Christmas. Or the night I sat on the bathroom floor holding his robe because I could not bear the empty bed. It only explained why those nights had been harder than they needed to be. And explanations are not the same as repair. I stood. The room fell still. Margaret looked up with swollen eyes. Are you leaving? I looked at the box in my hands. For one moment, revenge was simple. Leave. Take everything. Let her die knowing she had lost the last connection to her son. A clean punishment. A fair one, some might say. Then I remembered Thomas's letter. Do not let anyone, not even my mother, bury the love I left behind for you. If I left now, I would not be protecting Thomas's love. I would be burying it under my own anger. I set the box back on the table. Margaret gasped softly. I'm not forgiving you today, I said. Her face crumpled again. I know. And I may never forgive all of it. I know. But I'm not leaving tonight. Daniel looked away, wiping his eyes. Margaret closed both hands around mine. Her fingers felt cold and weightless. Thank you, she whispered. I did not say you're welcome. That would have been too easy. Instead, I said the only true thing I had. I'm staying because Thomas asked me to be braver than my anger. And for the first time in 8 years, the house did not feel like a battlefield. It felt like a place where something broken might finally be faced. Not fixed. Not yet. Faced. The next morning began without speeches. No dramatic forgiveness. No warm family breakfast where everyone suddenly understood everything. Real healing is rarely that efficient. Margaret slept late, exhausted from the confession. Daniel made coffee and burned the toast. I sat at the kitchen table with Thomas's wooden box in front of me, feeling as if I had aged several years in one night. I had stayed. That did not mean I was at peace. There is a difference. Staying simply meant I had chosen not to let anger make my decision for me. For a long time I sat there listening to the house. The refrigerator humming, the wind against the windows. Daniel quietly scraping black edges from toast with a butter knife. Finally he said, "You don't have to talk to me." I looked up. He stood by the counter, ashamed in a way that made him look younger. I know. I should have tried harder to find you. Yes. He nodded. No defense. No excuse. That helped more than he probably realized. I was grateful to her, he said. Margaret. Yes. He set the plate on the table but did not sit. She gave me a place to come after Thomas died. Not to live, just to belong somewhere. I think I let that make me cowardly. That was painfully honest. I looked at him more carefully. Daniel was not a boy anymore, but some wounds keep people younger than their age. Thomas had saved him. Margaret had trusted him. And I had become the stranger he was afraid to hurt. Did you listen to all of them? I asked. Most. Mine. He shook his head immediately. Number. I believed him. There were some labeled for you. I never opened those. That mattered. Not enough to erase 8 years. But enough to matter. Daniel finally sat down. Thomas talked about you like you were the safest place he'd ever known. The sentence struck me softly, not like a blow, but like a hand placed over an old bruise. I looked away. Outside, a gray morning stretched across the yard. He was mine too, I said. Daniel nodded. I know. After breakfast, I carried the wooden box to the sunroom. Margaret was awake, tucked beneath the blanket with a cup of tea untouched beside her. She looked at the box first, then at me. Fear passed through her face. I'm not taking it away, I said. Her shoulders loosened slightly. But from now on, nothing of Thomas's is hidden from me. No, she whispered, never again. I sat across from her. The sunroom smelled faintly of dust tea and old roses. A faded photograph of Thomas as a little boy sat on the table beside her chair. He was missing one front tooth and holding a fishing pole nearly taller than himself. I picked it up. I remember him telling me about this trip. Margaret smiled weakly. He fell into the creek twice, he said once. He lied. For the first time since I arrived, we laughed. Small laughter. Fragile. But real. Then silence returned gentler this time. Margaret looked at the photograph in my hand. I was so afraid of being erased. I waited. When he married you, I told everyone I was happy. And I was, mostly. That last word held a lifetime of complicated truth. But after he got sick, I watched him reach for you before anyone else. Ask for you. Wait for you. Smile when you entered the room. Her eyes filled. And I was ashamed of how jealous I felt. I said nothing. Not because I agreed. Because confession deserves room. I was his mother, she continued, but you were his home. That sentence settled between us. For 8 years we had been fighting over a man who had never asked to be divided. Thomas had loved us differently. Fully. Honestly, there had been no competition until grief created one. Margaret reached toward the box. Her hand trembled but stopped before touching it. Will you play one? I studied her face. Part of me wanted to refuse. Part of me wanted to say she had heard enough of his voice while I had lived without it. But revenge often arrives dressed as fairness. And I was beginning to recognize it. Which one? Her lips trembled. There's one labeled for me. I searched through the drives until I found it. For Mom if she gets angry. The title nearly made me smile. Thomas had known her too well. Daniel brought the laptop. Margaret closed her eyes as I pressed play. Thomas's voice filled the room. Mom, if you're listening to this, I'm guessing you're mad at somebody. Maybe Evelyn, maybe the doctors, maybe God, maybe me. Margaret covered her mouth. His voice continued, tired but warm. I need you to hear something from your stubborn son. Don't make Evelyn carry your grief. She's already carrying hers. Margaret began to cry. I sat very still. She loves me, Mom, and I love her. That doesn't take anything from you. Love doesn't run out because it's shared. It grows rooms. The recording continued for several minutes. Thomas thanked her for raising him, teased her about overcooking pork chops, reminded her to forgive people before pride made forgiveness embarrassing. Then near the end his voice softened. If you want to honor me, don't guard my memory like a locked door. Open it. Let people in, especially sunshine. Margaret bent forward as if the words had physically struck her. When the recording ended, no one spoke. No one needed to. The dead cannot force the living to change, but sometimes they leave words strong enough to make denial impossible. That afternoon, Margaret asked to see the backyard. Daniel helped her into a wheelchair. I brought a blanket. We took her outside beneath the old maple tree where Thomas had carved his initials as a boy. The bark had grown around the letters, but they were still visible if you knew where to look. Margaret touched them with her fingertips. He used to climb this tree and scare me half to death. He told me. He told you everything. Not everything. She looked at me then. Her eyes were tired but clear. No, I suppose he left some things for us to tell each other. That was the closest we came to forgiveness that day. Not an embrace. Not absolution. Just a door opening. Later, Daniel told me more about the foundation he had started for struggling veterans, using Thomas's advice as its quiet beginning. He wanted to name a small scholarship after him. Only if you help, he said. I almost refused from habit. Then I thought of Thomas saying love grows rooms. Yes, I said, I'll help. That night I listened to another recording alone. Thomas's voice filled the guest room. Sunshine, if you're still here after everything, I'm proud of you. I sat on the bed crying softly. For the first time in 8 years, the tears did not feel like drowning. They felt like water over dry ground. Something in me was not healed. Not yet, but it was softening. And sometimes softening is where healing begins. Margaret passed away 11 days later. It happened before sunrise in the same upstairs bedroom where Thomas had slept as a boy. There was no dramatic final sentence. No sudden confession. No perfect closing moment like people imagine in movies. Just a quiet breath, then another, then none. Daniel was downstairs making coffee. I was sitting beside her bed holding her hand. In the final days, she had become very small. Not just physically. Spiritually, too. All the pride had left her. All the bitterness. All the years of guarding pain as if pain were proof of love. What remained was a mother who had lost her son and waited too long to admit what grief had done to her. The night before she died, she asked me to open the curtains. Thomas liked morning light, she whispered. I smiled. He used to say the day felt rude if it arrived too fast. Margaret gave a weak laugh. That sounds like him. Then she looked at me for a long time. I don't deserve peace. I squeezed her hand. Maybe none of us deserve it. Her eyes filled. But we can still accept it when it comes. She closed her eyes. A few minutes later, she said, "Thank you for coming back." I thought carefully before answering. "I came back because you asked." Her mouth trembled. "I know. And I stayed because Thomas taught both of us better." A tear slipped down her cheek. Those were the last clear words we shared. After she passed, the house became strangely gentle. Death often makes a room feel empty. This time it felt released. Daniel called the hospice nurse. I called the funeral home. Together we moved through the practical tasks that follow loss. Phone calls, documents, clean clothes, a black dress from Margaret's closet. The ordinary work of saying goodbye. At the funeral, I expected to feel like an outsider. I didn't. People remembered Margaret as stubborn, generous, sharp-tongued, loyal, and difficult. All of it was true. That is one mercy age gives us. By the end, most people are too complicated to be described by one word. Daniel spoke briefly. He did not mention the recordings. He simply said Margaret had spent her final days trying to repair what grief had broken. That felt honest. Not too clean. Not too cruel. Just honest. After the service, I stood near Thomas's grave. For 8 years I had visited that cemetery alone, always carrying flowers, always leaving with silence. This time Daniel stood beside me, not as a son, not as a replacement, as a living piece of Thomas's kindness. He placed a small veteran's pin near the stone. "He saved me," Daniel said quietly. I looked at my husband's name carved in granite. "He saved a lot of people. You most of all." I smiled through tears. "Number." Daniel looked at me. "He loved me most. That's different." For a moment we both stood quietly. Then I added, "And he loved you enough to make sure you kept living." Daniel wiped his eyes. "I'm trying. That counts." Spring arrived slowly that year. I stayed in Ohio for several weeks after Margaret's funeral, helping Daniel sort through the house. Not because anyone demanded it, because I wanted to. We found old photographs, recipe cards, Thomas's school report cards, boxes of Christmas ornaments, a cracked baseball glove, a dozen small artifacts from a life that had once seemed finished to me. The recordings were copied carefully. One set for me, one set for Daniel, one set placed in a small archive at the Veterans Center he had built. We named the scholarship the Thomas Parker Second Chance Fund. The first recipient was a former Marine in his 50s who wanted to become an addiction counselor. At the small ceremony, Daniel asked me to say a few words. I almost refused. Public speaking had never been my favorite thing, but then I thought of Thomas, and the way he had kept showing up for people who thought they were beyond saving. So I stood before a room of veterans, volunteers, widows, and tired people trying to begin again. My husband believed no life was finished just because it had been broken, I said. My voice shook, but I kept going. He also believed love should never be hidden where the people who need it cannot reach it. Daniel looked down. So did I. Because we both knew what that sentence cost. Months passed. I returned home eventually. My own house felt different when I unlocked the door. Not lonely. Quiet. There is a difference. For 8 years I had treated silence as proof that Thomas was gone. Now I understood something gentler. Silence is not always absence. Sometimes it is space. Space to remember. Space to breathe. Space for love to become something other than pain. On the first anniversary of Margaret's death, Daniel drove to visit me. He brought a box of digitized recordings and a terrible homemade pie. Thomas would have mocked that pie for 20 minutes and eaten 2 slices anyway. We sat on my porch until evening. Before leaving, Daniel handed me one final envelope. I found this behind a drawer in Margaret's desk. My name was written on it. Not in Thomas's handwriting this time. Margaret's. Inside was a short note. Evelyn, I cannot give you back the years I stole. I can only hope you use the ones ahead better than I used the ones behind. Thank you for letting my son's love outlive my mistake. I folded the letter carefully. Then I placed it beside Thomas's. Not because the two were equal. They weren't. But because both belonged to the truth. And truth once faced deserves a place to rest. That night after Daniel left, I played Thomas's first recording again. His voice filled the living room. Hello, sunshine. I closed my eyes. For the first time, the nickname did not break me. It held me. 8 years after his death, Thomas kept the promise I thought cancer had taken from him. He had not kept me from grief. No one can do that. But he had found a way to remind me I was never meant to live inside it forever. If this story leaves anything with you, let it be this. Grief can make good people cruel. Pride can turn one painful week into years of silence. And forgiveness does not mean pretending the hurt never happened. It means deciding the hurt will not own every year you have left. If there is someone you need to call, a letter you need to send, or a wound you have carried too long, maybe today is the day to begin. And if this story touched your heart, share it with someone who may need the reminder that love should never be buried in silence. For more stories about family forgiveness, second chances, and the quiet strength it takes to heal, I would be honored if you joined me again. Thank you for listening.